Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. The debate about Huawei's role in the 5G network rollout in India continues. This comes at a time when the government has made its intentions clear to start with the 5G trial soon. A leading newspaper reported that a high-level committee on 5G is opposed to including Chinese vendors, including Huawei, in the 5G trials. There is a persistent fear that equipment being sold by Chinese vendors includes a backdoor which can allow the Chinese government to access data from 5G networks. Principal Scientific Advisor K. Vijay Raghavan, who heads a high-level committee on 5G, believes India should go for trials immediately with all except for Chinese vendors. The committee includes officials from the Intelligence Bureau, Ministry of External Affairs, Home Ministry, Telecom and IT Ministry and the Department of Science and Technology. This report comes just days after the US President Donald Trump lifted the trade ban on Huawei and has asked US-based companies to continue working with Huawei. In India, Huawei still doesn't have the permissions for the 5G trials. The company has already made repeated assurances that it does not share any data with any entity. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the 5G saga. Joining me on the program today are Professor N.K. Goyal, Chairman, Telecom Equipment Manufacturing Association. Also with us on the program today, Anil Choudhary, former Secretary, Internal Security, Ministry of Home Affairs. Rishi Raj, Executive Editor of the Financial Express. And Harshvi Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Professor Goyal, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and understand, what can 5G do for us and for our businesses and why is it important?
Let me be very frank that the much hype on 5G is on account of technology and not on account of use cases. While the standards were being made by 3GPP, they have not consulted any user department or user industries for this purpose. So it is more, and the exact specifications of 5G will come as release 16 in 2020. Leave that aside, 5G has a benefit that there is very little time used between sending from message one place to other place, and there will be lot of connected devices in a given area. But so far only two cases are being taught in the world. One is driverless car, another is robot surgery. We feel as an association, India doesn't need robot surgery or driverless car. The other use cases are yet to be found out. So having said that, 5G will be there because the technology hype is there. And another issue is that 5G is not a wireless technology. 5G consists of fixed line, satellite, Wi-Fi, internet and also wireless. So everybody is talking only the wireless part, not the other parts.
Okay, let's broaden the scope of the discussion now, and Anil Choudhary, I'd like to bring you to the picture now. So, what is the biggest fear in getting Chinese companies on board as far as 5G technology is concerned?
Okay, Frank, let me put the subject in perspective. India has unfortunately lagged far behind in information technology development, although we have the best brains being used by the agencies all over the world. We have done very little or pretty much nothing to develop our own internet protocol. We don't have any. So we have to, it's a geopolitical situation. You have to fall between the MNCs, US based or Huawei, which is Chinese based. Now, anytime you allow anything, the data is going out. Now, at the moment also, the data is flowing out. Each one, whether it's Facebook or Google, it's been taken up. And because the administrator, everything, the hub is outside. We don't have any control over it. Now, Huawei, we have to safeguard our own critical information infrastructure. That's it. That holds the key. And why block technology which is far superior than what is existing? 4G, fourth generation, fifth generation, has a penetration of 4,000 per square kilometer. 5G will have 1 million. You see the amount of usage it will throw open to the common man for private use. Forget about, and why should you bring in our sensitive data on internet at all. Standalone computers or electronically coded encoding systems of communication. We have to develop that. Cyber, it's called, this electronic coding, decoding, we don't have. We must develop. We must have our own system infrastructure built up. Unfortunately, the companies, private companies, get the full backing in the US of the NIA, in China, but in India, no, nothing. They are on their own. They don't have the fund, they don't have the means, and so where we are, nothing. Microchips technology, almost zero.
Right.
Mexico is making microchips. Every country is making many, but we don't, because I'll tell you what the reason. The reason is that telecom policy makers have no clue about what is 5G and 4G. Let's face realities. Journalists, of course, the political leadership has to be told. We must have technically savvy, who understand technology, who understand the application to get into the decision making, policy making levels. Only then we can move ahead. Raising objections, yes, this will happen, that will happen. Why block? No, take safeguards. When you're allowing trials to take place, you said, no, you will use our system, our data, you will allow us, no data will go out, make sure we will have to cover it. We have our own system to safeguard our critical information system. But other data, let it go.
Do we have the wherewithal to go about doing something like that?
We don't.
So that is the biggest challenge.
That's the challenge, yes.
That's the biggest challenge, yeah, certainly. We'll come to how we can get around that and what really needs to be done. Something was spoken about on these lines at the G20 summit as well. I'd like to bring in the other panelists to talk about that. But before that, let me go across to Rishi Raj. Rishi Raj, why did the US, who has major concerns really as far as Huawei is concerned, they've been talking about it for several years now, finally decide to lift the trade ban on Huawei?
See, the issue is very simple over here. US and China are involved in a trade dispute. Now the trade war so you begin with a trade war with basically very harsh conditionalities, hard demand, and then slowly looking into the realities of business, reality of the needs of your own industry, you soften the demand. That's what is happening. None of the allies of the US went about banning Huawei minus Japan and Australia, as far as I know. So as far as India is concerned, you should, the general tendency should not be basically to fall into the US-China trade war issues. You should basically evaluate it from your own interest. And there comes the interest of your industry. You have to see what is the position of your industry. Currently, the 4G network of all the operators has been built by Huawei. 3G network majority has been built by Huawei. Later 2G technology also networks have also been built by Huawei. So suddenly creating this fear about and bringing this fear aspect with regard to Huawei in 5G, to me doesn't make sense. Then you have to look at the cost benefit analysis also. Right now the telecom industry is financially going through a distress. It's financially in a very bad position. In fact, you must have seen over the weekend that the telecom minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, has constituted a committee under DOT secretary to basically look into how some kind of their financial stress can be brought down. Now, if you look at Huawei has about 30% market share in the component sector globally. Its cost is 20% lower than other competitors. In India, when you conduct auctions, the spectrum prices are high. Right now, DOT has put the ball back into TRA's court by saying that, review the high prices. At a time when the industry is, burdened with debt, at a time when spectrum prices are high and there are no sign which shows that, it will be lowered, you bring about an aspect that you are going to basically ban one of a major equipment manufacturer, which not only provides components at a lesser cost, but also provides bank loans and vendor financing, which is at much lower interest than your domestic banks do. And if you do that, then you may be talking about technology, but will that technology be, will the telecom operators be able to basically use that technology and make it reach the people?
Right. Certainly. So these are big questions that need to be answered really and taken forward as to, how we can go beyond some of these challenges that are staring us in the face as far as 5G technology is concerned. But Rishi, Pant, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. At some point in time, do you see this affecting Sino-Indian ties and the Chinese government getting involved at some point in time to try and ensure that its companies like Huawei and others get pushed through?
Frank, I'm afraid I think we are way past that question where that situation where we are looking at this primarily through an economic prism. I think we are now in a basically geopolitical struggle between two preeminent powers of our time. And as as was pointed out earlier, we have not built our strengths. So clearly we are dependent on how these geopolitical tensions resolve themselves. And unfortunately, trade and technology are at the center of it. We can deny it, we can make an economic argument around it, but I think there is no denying the fact that in a sense what you are looking at is how you fit into this larger geopolitical frame and what your response is going to be to the geopolitical contestation. And the geopolitical contestation is not simply between Americans and the Chinese. We are part of it. So, to make an argument that somehow the Chinese company that is going to develop 5G technology, which will have implications for the entire generation of emerging technologies, will have no consequence, and to compare that to the American system where states and markets actually don't interfere that kind, where in the kind of synergies that you see in China. Huawei is basically a Chinese, its origins are basically Chinese military. And if you look at the Chinese laws, Chinese companies are, they have to provide intelligence when they're required by the Communist Party. There is no comparison between what the Facebooks and the Googles of the world do. That's a dispute between a state, Indian state, and a private company. But here is the dispute between India and basically the might of the Chinese state. So I think all these factors will have to be taken into account as you decide where you are going in the next phase of your of the technology evolution, which is going to determine not simply what happens in a very narrow range of telecommunications, but entire spectrum of your fourth industrial revolution will depend on this kind of technology. So I'm afraid we'll have to look at it more broadly than simply looking at it from a technological or a purely cost-benefit calculus.
So despite the assurances given by Huawei, we need to be wary because national security is at stake here, is what you're suggesting, and we need to look at the holistic picture. Is that correct?
I think so. See, it has to be part of this discussion. It cannot be, you cannot simply make this on that this is an economic argument and we will go by the economic logic of it because Huawei is so cheap and Huawei is at the forefront of it. Sure. Because there are implications of how we are going to deal with the Chinese, and given, as you pointed out, as your question was implicit in a question, Sino-Indian relations are what they are. We all know about it. So I think there has to be some sensitivity to those issues. Whether or not that becomes a determining issue is another question.
Absolutely. All right. So, N.K. Goyal, as far as 5G is concerned, what are the kind of opportunities and challenges the technology poses?
I would first like to address some of the issues which has come by now. The first is the backdoor assurance. This is a false statement. On record, Vodafone Italy found out the backdoors and Huawei said we have removed, but they have not removed. When they again asked, they said it is a novel industry practice, it cannot be removed. Another case of backdoor for Africa has the same shooting. Come to the point raised by my here. Yes, at the time of 2G, 3G, 4G, there was no Chinese law because Chinese law came in 2017 by which the Chinese companies are duty bound to provide all intelligence, everything to them. So the danger has come recently. When it comes to the question of, as we said, in terms of the cost part, I don't think that decisions like this are taken depending on the cost. Earlier in 2011 or 12, it was decision of the Cabinet Committee on Security. It is recorded that we have some risk of Chinese equipment. So they decided to have the mandatory testing from 1st April 2013, which is pending till to date. So the cost doesn't come here. And also it is a fact that the maximum IPRs for 5G are held by Ericsson's, Qualcomm, Nokia. Huawei comes the fourth part. And on record, the Ericsson and Huawei, Ericsson and Nokia have said that they will beat the prices of any country wherever it is. So this is these 3-4 things apart.
Sure. Talking about Nokia and Ericsson, I think there was a report earlier today, Rishi Raj as well, that Samsung has said that it is ready to work with telecom operators for secure 5G rollout in India. How do you see that development? Do you see like-minded companies really coming together to try and take on Huawei at some point in time?
Ideally, it should be a competitive scenario. So, that Samsung development is a good development. But let's go a little back in time and just see how did Huawei develop? Meaning Nokia, Ericsson, all these vendors were earlier also there. Why did they lose out and Huawei emerge? And during that time, the biggest ambassadors for any company, meaning today in US, when US there is a talk about basically outsourcing will be banned or there will be curbs put. The biggest ambassadors are the US companies who basically say, they will basically do outsourcing with Indian companies. So here the Indian companies, meaning the committee were formed to basically look into the Huawei aspect over here, doesn't have industry representation. 90% of the market, 90% of it's a private sector industry, which will be using the 5G technology and will be making it available to the people. There's no representation to the industry in this committee. You will have to evaluate you will have to say what is the security architecture. As Mr. Choudhary had pointed out, we will have to actually have basically a meeting with our own industry. There we will have to take their inputs, that if Huawei is allowed, if it is not banned, what are the ways by which we can secure our data? What are the ways by which we see that such leakages do not happen as it is being feared? That aspect is missing currently in the discussion. Technological development cannot be a monopolistic thing. You ban one company, obviously with time with reduced players the cost will go up. Even if we don't see the cost, and with this Huawei fear is not for the first time. You go back in time to 2010 or 11, about a malware fear was there, and there was a lot of talk in the government about it. At the end, nothing happened. So the point is that banning for everything, not allowing is a very, very major important decision, and it cannot be taken by a couple of secretaries of the government of India, which will also include technology, science and technology advisor or ministry. You will have to take into account the inputs of the Indian industry.
All right. So all stakeholders need to be consulted, and an informed decision should be taken on something like this, is what you're suggesting. Professor Pant, going back to a point that one of the panelists raised earlier, and something that is related to this Samsung development, something that happened at the G20 summit, where, it was spoken about that how India and the United States can come together and, deal with this issue of 5G and come out with their own technology. So do you see that happening? How viable is it, and, how will it benefit India and the United States?
Well, at the moment, it's a bit far-fetched, given that where Mr. Trump has taken his policy on 5G, because he seems to be meandering all along. As you pointed out earlier to a different in your question to a different panelist, what Mr. Trump seems to have is these random responses to Chinese behavior rather than a consistent strategy. So you had this unique situation where weeks before you had his Secretary of State roaming around the world telling allies not to sign on to 5G. Then he goes to G20 and gives concessions on 5G to the Chinese. So basically he's looking at this primarily through the trade lens, and therefore he's sort of calibrating his response. Now whether or not he is able to get anything out of the Chinese remains to be seen, but he at the same time cannot now put pressure on India and say, well, ban the Chinese and ban Huawei. He can't do that, given that he himself is now dealing with the Chinese on 5G. So I think clearly what has happened at the G20, where some pressure on India has been somewhat relieved from the US. But it is now for India itself to decide where its interests lie and how it wants to proceed. And that, as we have discussed, remains a different question. But clearly, I think if India and the US want to work on a technology, which might or may not, in some ways be equivalent to what 5G, what Huawei is offering. I think that's a bit far-fetched at this point, given that the stakes clearly in the US itself. There is a lot of debate about how US has fallen behind the innovation cusp, and there was just recent report where Pentagon is blamed for actually not allowing innovation to happen. Very, very interestingly, given that Pentagon in the past used to be at the harbinger of cutting-edge technologies. So in a sense, there is a real realization in the US and part of it which feeds into this dilemma of what US can do with China, that US is losing this technology game. And if they allow China to continue on 5G, then the next fourth generation of fourth industrial revolution would belong to China rather than to America, and therefore this concern about what 5G's integration into the global economic order might mean.
And Mr. Choudhary, as in your experience in the Home Ministry, I must ask you this question: can India risk it with China, and at what level?
Listen, I'll bring you back to the point I made earlier. Let us build our own cyber defense. Then forget about whether it's China or it's this or that. Let's do that first and then worry. China, yeah, we have problems with China. We have border problems. We have they look upon each other as rivals. Yes, yes. But then why deny ourselves higher technology only because it's coming from China? No. Safeguard your national, what is in your national interest? Go for that. Forget about US, forget about China. What is good for you and how you can protect your cyberspace. Cyber defense, cyber offense. The wars are going to be fought in cyberspace. Are we prepared for that? Do we have cyber warriors? No. I worked in the National Technical Research Organization, which is supposed to look after cyber defense offense. We have a long way to go. See, but we have the best brains. The best IT brains are being utilized. You go to Israel, you go to the US, you go to any part of the world, except perhaps China, and you'll find people from Andhra Pradesh, from Kerala, from working there. See, but why are we being so myopic? Why are we not being more wider vision and say, yes, let's go for it. This is good for our country. Let's take that decision. And you see, that is the point which I'm trying to make. Let's make our own defenses so impregnable. Let them come from anywhere. But we defend our own critical information infrastructure. That is what is to be protected. Otherwise, data flowing, what you are talking about, the other guy is talking, it's all right. But then there is certain data which needs to be protected. That has to be, there have been several schemes in the past. You see, unfortunately, each one looks at it from his own prism end. We have multi-agencies looking after security. One will say one thing, the turf wars will break out during the time when it's a question of national security. We must work as one. And why not people and private partnership in this? Public and private partnership must play a role. It's not. It is not. We have companies like Tata who are doing all over the world, and also others. The company from Bangalore, what's it, the chairman?
Infosys.
Huh?
Infosys.
They're doing great job all over the world, but not in India. Why? That's the question I ask.
Okay. Probably time for Tata, the likes of Tatas and Infosys and Wipros to come together with someone like an ISRO and take things forward is what Mr. Choudhary is suggesting, and probably will be world leaders on that front as well. Quick closing comments from all my guests, starting with you, with NK Goyal, Professor Goyal, with the best way forward really as far as this particular 5G issue is concerned.
Best way, as told by Mr. Choudhary, to take everybody together as stakeholders, try to assess first, do we need it? If yes, how do we go and where do we go? But I want to just add two things. The problem with China is that, as was said by other colleague, it is not a private company we are dealing. Other companies, when we say globalization, Huawei, except Huawei, etc., they are private companies. Here we are dealing with a state. Huawei is not a private company, it has been documented very well. Another point usually comes up is the heavy debt of the private operators. There was a meeting with Honorable FM on 13th June when this point raised, and FM asked a question. You are increasing customers, increasing growth, increasing debt. And why increasing debt? Is it not a commercial decision? And the same view was taken last year in the month of July 17 or so by the Interministerial Group. So this theory of a heavy debt is coming up for last so many years.
Right. All right. Rishi Raj.
Point is to be looked at that one should take a holistic decision based on our own interest, and that interest will include, apart from security, also your requirement, your preparedness, your ability, and for that there has to be a very open and healthy dialogue between the government, security agencies and the industry. One should not overdo the security and the espionage aspect. One should take a very holistic view by making it a multi stakeholder dialogue, and also looking at from your interest point of view rather than being governed what is happening between what are the clashes between US as well as China.
Right. All right. Pant?
Well, I think I first of all, I think the most important point here has been made by Mr. Choudhary, which is, I think, that we need experts around the table. You don't need primarily bureaucrats deciding, which are generalist in nature by definition. And I think the more professionally the stakeholdership of this project is, the better results you will get. But the other point is that unfortunately, we are in the geopolitical contest. We are in a world which is being riven with this tension, and you have to make decision now on this. So clearly, some impact of that is going to you are going to have on the decision that you take. But if you build your own domestic strength, then you can probably ward off some of these challenges. But the reality is that a lot of this paranoia around this issue is primarily around what our relationship with China has been and how China has played this game vis-a-vis. The more China scuttles India's rise, the more difficult it will be for any Indian government to come out and say, let's help Chinese company get ground in India. I think that's a big no-no. So I think it has to be understood also on the part of Beijing what it needs to do. They can't just come today and say, well, give us a place, give Huawei a place. You should also remember that they are also under stress. Their number of their markets are getting restricted. They are under real pressure, and if India can leverage this opportunity to its advantage, I think would be very beneficial for India.
All right, and Mr. Choudhary, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, you see, you made the point. ISRO, we are doing very well in space technology, satellites. We are doing very well. Why? And we are not doing well in this cyberspace. The reasons are there. I agree with the fellow panelists who have spoken. We need to focus on our own interest, our own security, and build our own defenses and get people together. The bureaucratic shacklehold over decision making in this critical area must be loosened, and experts should be called in, and the decisions taken all together holistically in the national interest.
All right. With that, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that all stakeholders really need to be taken on board before we come out with a decision on 5G or any other important issue. Really, experts should be consulted, and only then can we take a holistic decision on what's best for India and what's in our best future as well. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.